I'm very pleased to be part of this conference, and let's go straight to the first slide. So this presentation is meant both for veterinary researchers working on emerging epidemics, as well as for people funding such research, as well as for the end users and the policymakers making use of the recommendations for such research. At the moment, there is a major outbreak of high-path avian influenza H5N1 circulating. Here you can see the cases in the UK, in flocks and in captive birds, as well as the submitted wild birds. But also there are abundant cases both in poultry and wild birds in the European Union. And since 2 months, the virus has spread across the Atlantic and is spreading along the east coast of North America and also infecting poultry flocks up till Indiana and Kentucky. And the expectation is that it will spread further. However, although this is a big outbreak, I'd like to place this talk in an even larger and more long-term perspective, namely in the context of major global problems. Those following the news will have heard the UN Secretary General introduce the latest IPCC report about the threat to human well-being and health of climate change. Other major problems are major biodiversity loss, as well as the increased risk of pandemics, including that from high-path avian influenza. So we as a human society need to decide whether we're going to continue on the current trajectory, leading to global ecosystem breakdown, or make a societal transformation, leading to a revitalization of the global ecosystem. In essence, human society's problem is that it is living beyond planetary boundaries, as defined by Will Steffen et al. In the early 10s. And at the moment, we have exceeded 4 of these planetary boundaries, namely climate change, biologic genetic diversity, land use change, and biochemical flows, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen. And veterinary research plays an important role in several of these planetary boundaries. Namely, food animal farming is having major environmental impacts worldwide. And just to indicate its scope, if we make the theoretical calculation of changing from a diet of animal-based to plant-based protein, there would be major decreases in land use, greenhouse gas emissions, acidification and eutrophication of the environment, and the withdrawal of fresh water. But also with regards to pet animals, there are major environmental impacts. For example, in the United States, the food production for dogs and cats adds on 25 to 30% environmental impact to the food production for Americans. And of course, also animal-related activities are related to the increased risk of emerging infectious diseases, namely intensification of livestock farming, intensification of trade and farming of wild animals, and the increased incursion into tropical forests, whereby we hunt and eat wild animals for food. So there is a need for transformative changes, and IPBES 2019, a report from the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, concluded that we can only reach a sustainable human society if we make transformative changes, namely a fundamental and system-wide reorganization of our society across technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. And this far-reaching and radical conclusion was approved by all 138 IPBES member states, including the Netherlands and the UK. So we have a mandate to follow on this conclusion. And similar conclusions have been made by IPCC regarding global warming, and a recent IPBES workshop on emerging infectious diseases for the risk of pandemics. So these are fine words, but how to translate them into practice? I think that a way that in veterinary research we can implement these transformative changes is by implementing a One Health approach in the broad sense. And the definition of One Health I use is that by the American Veterinary Medical Association, namely the integrative effort of multiple disciplines to attain optimal health for people, animals, and the environment. So again, to put this further into practice, I've indicated what I think are the differences between our current approach and the One Health approach for veterinary research, particularly regarding problem definition and solutions coming from our research. So in the current research, we concentrate on the health hazard for domestic animals, and we concentrate on the financial costs to society of these health hazards. And the scope of our problem is often restricted, for example, between pathogen and host. In contrast, I imagine that in a One Health approach, we would give equal attention to the health of ecosystems and wildlife as we do to domestic animals and humans. Besides financial costs, we would also give attention to ecological and social costs, and we would take a much broader scope, namely the interrelationship of all species that are in the system that is under study. With regards to the solutions coming from the results of our research, in the current approach, we're happy with short-term solutions. We're also, it's acceptable if we find solutions for the proximate causes. And we actually prefer to have a solution that maintains the status quo, that we are able to continue business as usual. In contrast, in a One Health approach, we would focus as well on long-term solutions. We would focus as well on solutions that actually deal with the underlying causes and so prevent future problems. And we realize that the status quo actually is not leading to a sustainable society, and instead we consider solutions to be acceptable if the health of humans, wildlife, and animals and ecosystems are improved. So to show how this might work, I give an example of highly pathogenic avian influenza, on which I've done research for many years, in poultry in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we have a high poultry population, over 100 million chickens at any one time, and it's a fairly intensive industry with average farm sizes of 80,000 for broilers and 40,000 for layers. In fact, the Netherlands has the highest poultry density of any EU country, including the UK, which was still in the EU in 2016. The density in the Netherlands per hectare of utilized agriculture area is 6 times that of the European Union average nationwide, and per region, per NUTS 2 region, which are provinces in the Netherlands, in some provinces the density is up to 18 times the European average. So this is a fairly extreme situation, but it also occurs in some other European countries, for example in Italy, France, and parts of Germany, as well as in other countries in the world, for example, in the eastern United States and in China. So the health hazards from the current outbreak are for poultry and for wild birds, and also for humans. The zoonotic risk transmission has been increased from low to medium in December, as it has for the rest of the European Union. Besides these health hazards, there are other human health hazards from the poultry production, namely the exposure to particulate matter, which results in premature mortality and increased risk of respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. Existing zoonoses like Campylobacter, the risk of emerging infectious diseases like avian influenza, but could also be others, which is considered to be somewhat probable with a potentially severe impact, and problems of antimicrobial resistance and a severe odor annoyance. Poultry production also has environmental health hazards, the main ones being nitrogen deposition, resulting in degradation of terrestrial nature, greenhouse gas emissions, and very extreme, the land use, which is more than 8,000 square kilometers, mainly in South America and North America, to provide feed for the Dutch poultry. So to get an overview of all these different health hazards, I made this table, which I call a One Health matrix, in which the columns are the different host categories: environment, wild and domestic animals, and humans. And the rows are the different stages of the human activity, in this case, the poultry sector, pre-farm, farm, and post-farm. So I first listed here the hazards from the current high-path avian influenza outbreak, which are for poultry as well as for wild birds and for humans. If there were to be another high-path outbreak in the future, where there's a low-path to high-path switch of the virus in an intensive poultry farm, this would cause problems in the poultry sector, but also, again, in wild birds and in humans. And then the other health hazards for the environment, for wildlife, poultry, and humans are listed here. So you get a complete overview of all the different health hazards associated with the poultry sector in the Netherlands. And now we go to the current approaches to deal with high-path avian influenza in veterinary research. And at the moment, there is a discussion to replace the stamping out policy in Europe by preventive vaccination, for example, by a recombinant turkey herpes virus vaccine. So what would this do with regards to the health hazards? It would reduce the problem in poultry and in humans, but the virus in wild birds would still circulate. It would have no effect on future high-path outbreaks, and it also would not affect the other health hazards. So the outcome would be rather limited. What about a different approach, a One Health approach to high-path avian influenza? We've done such an exercise with an expert group on zoonoses last year for the Dutch government, and the recommendations dealing with high-path avian influenza virus are shown here. We worked according to a One Health approach. We indicated that monitoring of wild bird populations was important, that there should be an annual biosecurity check on poultry farms, that we should encourage the acceptability of vaccination, and that we should reduce both the density of poultry farms and the number of animals per farm to prevent the efficient transmission of pathogens between farms. And we should avoid having poultry farms in waterfowl-rich areas to avoid the risk of the virus going from wild birds to poultry and then spreading further. So I want to concentrate on those last two recommendations and what effect they would have in our One Health matrix. So you can see that it would reduce the risk of spread of the current outbreak in poultry, and thereby also the risk for associated humans. It also would reduce the chance of a low path switching to high path in the future, and thereby spreading in poultry as well as to wild birds and to humans. And importantly, it would reduce the health hazards from most of the other problems of the intensive poultry industry, except the current spread of the high-path avian influenza virus in wild birds, which will continue whatever we do in the poultry industry at the moment. And it would also not change the workplace conditions of people working in the poultry sector. These have more relationship to work safety policies. So taken together, I think that this One Health approach fits with the transformative changes in the necessity for technological, economic, and social factors. It can address major global problems that we've listed. It requires that besides the current multidisciplinary approach that we use, we would need to involve additional sectors and disciplines to achieve these changes. And I believe that it can also be applied to other areas of veterinary research, both those dealing with infectious diseases and with non-infectious diseases. So in conclusion, I think that the overall principle of this One Health approach is to identify the human activity, that's the main correlate of the specific health hazard, and to assess the full scope of health hazards that are associated with this activity, not only on the specific host category, poultry, but also on the other whole host categories, environment, wildlife, humans. And using this One Health approach could allow veterinary researchers to contribute to transformative changes in society, and so help to stop the rapidly downward spiral in the global state of our ecosystems. This work is funded in part by the Delta Flu Project, and if you would like to contact me about any of these points, here is my email address. And I've also given a number of references that I've used in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thijs. Can I open the floor for questions? Over there. Well, the mic is going over. As I say, it's really enjoyed that. Just to remind the audience that the Scottish Government are funding other centres of expertise in climate exchange to deal with climate change, crew to deal with waters in particular. So that basically we're well aligned to work together on a lot of these issues that you're pointing out. Question, please.
Darren Shaw, University of Edinburgh. Are you able to say whether which has got the greatest impact, either removing farms from wetlands or reducing the density stroke number of animals and other aspects? Have you done any sort of quantification of the impact of these measures?
No, we haven't done that yet. No. So that's a very good question. At the moment, we have seen that in several studies, both in the Netherlands and in Denmark, and I believe also in the past in the UK, that the proximity of poultry farms to water bird-rich areas does increase the risk for incursion of low-path avian influenza virus.
Hi there, John Berezowski from SRUC in Inverness. It was a very good presentation, thank you very much. You've done a really good job of presenting the scientific side of things, but One Health needs to make change, and change is not just made by science. So it seems to me that the people part of it are not included in this. And have you talked about strategies for engaging the public decision makers and others in this discussion about this problem, looking at it through this lens? Thank you.
Thanks very much. That's a very good question. So unfortunately, I only have 15 minutes to give my presentation, and including the people part of this transformative change question would easily double that. Also, I'm certainly not an expert in the social sciences. And this is also an explorative avenue for me to try to join up the knowledge that I have on avian influenza and emerging infectious diseases to the changes that are required in society. So I am starting to work with the social science people to discuss these questions, and I'm also involved in several committees in scientific organizations where we discuss these questions, which relate more to things like narrative and worldview and ways of thinking about the world, which seem quite foreign to a hard-nosed natural scientist, but I think really are necessary for us to make to deal with the problems that we are dealing with at the moment. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, it's clear that these problems that we're dealing with regards to emerging infectious diseases, but also biodiversity loss and climate change, can't just be solved by technological fixes. We need to change the way that we are living.
Oops. Christine Middlemas, UK Chief Vet. I was interested in you said that the risk for human infection had been increased from low to medium, and what was behind that?
Yeah, so the ECDC in December changed the risk of transmission of high-path avian influenza virus to humans that are involved with potentially infected birds or mammals from low to low medium. The rationale behind that is in a paper with the lead author Cornelia Adelhoog from the ECDC. It relates to the fact that this virus has infected several wild mammals in the last 2 years in Europe, and that both in these wild mammals and in some wild birds, mutations have been seen in the virus that fit with improved replication and increased virulence in mammals. Also, these wild mammals often died with a fatal encephalitis. Besides that, the same subclade of virus as is circulating now in Europe and now also in North America is one that is causing increased numbers of human cases in China, of which about 50% are fatal. In addition, the fact that the virus has appeared to become endemic in the wild bird population, namely in an EFSA study, we've seen that the same genotype of the virus that was present in autumn 2020 was still present in Western Europe in wild birds in autumn 2021, which is the first time that we've seen such a long-term presence of this virus in wild birds in Western Europe, indicating that it appears to have become endemic. This means that the virus is able to reassort easily with the many low pathogenic avian influenza viruses that always were endemic in wild bird populations, allowing variants of the virus to appear with new characteristics that we cannot predict, but which could be characteristics including increased human-to-human efficiency. So increased human-to-human transmission. So all these things together have made this risk of zoonotic transmission higher.
Thank you.
Hopefully you've got time for one more. Gordon Hickman from DEFRA, head of our exotic disease control policy. Fascinating talk, thank you very much. Really interested in your question about biosecurity assessments and independent assessments and how you're managing to balance that sort of qualitative versus quantitative approach to that assessment and how you've gone about it, whether you've got a sort of a structured framework.
Thanks very much for that question. So I'm not the expert in that area and not on that recommendation. So I can't give detailed information about that. A colleague of mine, Arjan Stegeman, is the person who knows more about that. We do see that in the Netherlands, and I think your experience in the UK will be the same, is that this current outbreak has led to incursions quite frequently in poultry farms that previously were considered to have a high biosecurity. For example, standard broiler farms where the chicks don't come outside and don't require large amounts of change of bedding, etc., so that you wouldn't think that they could become infected easily, and yet frequently incursions do occur. It may be that we are not finding the leaks in the system that are now becoming more important because the virus is becoming more. There's a higher environmental pressure of the virus. It's present more in the environment, and therefore even small leaks allow the virus to get in. However, we can't exclude the possibility that poultry farms are not following all the procedures that are supposed to be in place properly. And therefore, that's why we make this recommendation to have a yearly check, and for it to be a check by an independent person. So not, let's say, the local veterinarian, but somebody from outside who can make an objective evaluation of the situation. One of the things that has come up in trying to find how incursions take place is, for example, that it may be important that there are rain gutters at the bottom of the roofs, so that if it's raining, there's no chance for water to leak into places where it's not supposed to leak into, for example, along ventilators, and in this way for virus to more easily get into a poultry farm.
We have a question from an online delegate. Damien Barrett is asking, are the medical profession and environmental scientists interested in the One Health approach?
So the One Health approach in the last few years has been driven mainly by the veterinary profession. There are certainly a number of people from the medical profession who are very interested in this approach, and their number is not large, but it is adequate, and we're working well together with them. And I think from the side of the environmental scientists, they have been aware of environmental problems with all kinds of human activities already for quite some time. And in a way, some of these issues dealing with environmental problems are not new, but we're framing them in a different way. So we're framing them in the way of environmental health, which you could also call environmental resilience. And I think that they are interested to work together on this, partly because by bringing these different aspects together, it becomes much more clear to everybody, the general public, but also to the researchers themselves, that this is a wide problem going across different sectors and can best be solved by a joint approach.